The last time I sat at the folding table, I was 29 years old. Thanksgiving at my father's house. 32 people crammed into the Colonial on Maple Avenue, the one with the wrought iron gate and the oak tree my great-grandfather planted in 1923. The dining room table sat 18 beneath a Waterford chandelier. I was in the living room, wedged between a potted fern and my 10-year-old cousin, eating mashed potatoes off a paper plate. My father stood at the head of the main table. Charles Whitmore, retired family court judge, 6'2", voice like a closing argument. He raised his glass, some Napa Cabernet he'd been decanting since noon, and the room went quiet the way it always did when he stood up. "Before we do the pie," he said, "I have an announcement regarding my mother's estate. My grandmother, Evelyn Whitmore, died 8 weeks ago at 89, passed on a Tuesday morning at Hertford Hospital with my mother holding her hand. I got the call at 5:47 a.m., sitting at my kitchen table in my 400-square-foot apartment in New Haven, staring at a blueprint for a community garden I'd been hired to design. My mother's voice on the phone had been thin, like tracing paper. "She's gone, Claire." I drove the 40 minutes home in silence. No radio, just the hum of the highway and the sound of my own breathing. At the funeral, my father gave the eulogy. Spoke for 15 minutes about the Whitmore legacy, about tradition, about how his son would carry the family forward. He mentioned my brother Lucas by name 6 times, mentioned my mother once in passing, did not mention me at all. Afterward, in the receiving line, my Aunt Patricia's husband asked what I was working on these days. Before I could answer, my father's voice came from behind me. "She draws pictures of bushes for rich people." A few polite chuckles. I felt the heat start at my collarbone and climb. I was turning to leave when an older man I didn't recognize stepped forward. Silver hair, tortoiseshell glasses, a quiet face. He shook my hand gently. "Your grandmother was very proud of you," he said. "I'll be in touch." Then he disappeared into the crowd of black coats before I could ask his name. That man was Walter Sheffield, and he was holding the key to everything. So back to Thanksgiving. My father standing at the head of the table, glass raised, the room leaning in. My brother Lucas beside him, arms slung over the back of his wife's chair. Alison, his wife, adjusting her diamond studs. My mother at the far end of the table, staring at the centerpiece like it might catch fire. "Mother left everything to me to manage," my father announced. "I'll ensure the family assets are distributed appropriately, based on capability." His eyes found me through the archway into the living room. "Claire, that means you don't need to worry about any of it. Complicated matters aren't really your area." Lucas nodded. A few people smiled. I set my fork down. "Dad," I said, "Grandma told me." "Your grandmother was confused at the end," he cut in. "Whatever she said, forget it." My mother looked at her plate. She always looked at her plate. After dinner, I went upstairs to my old room. The same twin bed I'd slept in from age 6 to 18. The same ceiling fan that wobbled. The same faded poster of the Brooklyn Bridge on the wall. I opened the nightstand drawer out of habit, and there it was. A cream-colored envelope. My name on the front in handwriting I'd know anywhere. Evelyn's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. Inside, 2 pages, front and back. The pen had pressed hard enough to leave grooves. "Claire, if you're reading this, I'm gone and your father is already doing what I knew he would. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him while I was alive. I tried. But men like your father don't hear women. They only hear documents. The original trust is with my attorney, Walter Sheffield. His office is on Elm Street in Hertford. The copy I've left you is partial, not enough to prove anything on its own, but enough for you to know I'm telling the truth. Don't show this to anyone, not your father, not Lucas, not even your mother. I love Diane, but she will tell Charles. Wait until the right time. Walter will know what to do. You are always my architect, Claire, the one who builds. Don't let them tear you down. All my love, Grandma." Tucked behind the letter, a partial photocopy. 6 pages, the header read, "Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Evelyn M. Whitmore, settlor," and halfway down the first page, highlighted in yellow, "Beneficiary, Claire Evelyn Whitmore." I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and sat in the dark for a long time. 3 weeks passed. I didn't call Walter Sheffield. I wasn't ready to risk it. What if it was nothing? What if the one person who believed in me was just a sick old woman who didn't know what she was signing? Then my mother called. "Your father wants everyone together for Thanksgiving. He says he wants to mend things." I almost laughed. Charles Whitmore had never mended a thing in his life. I'll think about it, Mom. Please, honey, he's trying. I said I'd let her know, hung up and sat at my kitchen table. Then I opened my laptop and finally read the email I'd been avoiding. Lucas had forwarded it to me by accident 2 weeks earlier. Subject line, RE, Trust Amendment Draft Petition. 7 messages between my brother and my father. Lucas had drafted a petition to the court requesting a change of beneficiary on Grandma Evelyn's trust. The grounds cited, financial incompetence of the named beneficiary. Me, unstable career decisions, no significant assets, outstanding student debt. But the line that made my vision blur wasn't the legal jargon. It was the casual message Lucas had typed at the bottom. She won't fight it, she never fights anything. That's the beauty of it, Dad. I screenshot every message, uploaded them to my cloud drive, and backed them up on a thumb drive I kept in my jewelry box. Then I called my mother back, tell Dad I'll be there for Thanksgiving. The next morning I called Walter Sheffield's office. A receptionist answered. Warm, efficient, I gave my name. A pause, then, Miss Whitmore, Mr. Sheffield has been expecting your call, can you come in today? 2 hours later I sat across from him in a small office on Elm Street. Bookshelves lined every wall, an oriental rug, faded but dignified, on his desk a cold mug of coffee. Walter Sheffield was the man from the funeral. Same silver hair, same tortoiseshell glasses, same quiet calm. Your grandmother hired me 20 years ago, he said. 8 years ago, after a conversation that troubled her deeply, she asked me to create an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. He slid a document across the desk. Cream-colored paper, a notary's red seal, signatures, $580,000 in an educational trust managed by Webster Bank. Irrevocable, he said, means your father as trustee cannot alter the beneficiary. Any petition to do so requires either your written consent or a court ruling based on evidence of the settlor's mental incapacity at the time of signing. Your grandmother anticipated this. She had her physician perform a cognitive evaluation the same week she signed. The results are in the file. She was fully competent. I exhaled, the first full breath in weeks. There's more, Sheffield said. Your father filed a petition 3 weeks ago requesting a change of beneficiary. He listed Lucas. He told the court he was unable to locate you to obtain consent. His jaw tightened. You and I both know that's not true. I showed him the email chain. He read it without expression, then looked up. This is evidence of deliberate breach of fiduciary duty. If you want to fight this, you have everything you need. I nodded, I want to fight this. He paused. There's one more thing, Claire. Your grandmother also left you the cottage on Cape Cod. It's included in the trust. I don't think your father knows about it. He never read the full document. The Cape Cod cottage, the little grey-shingled house in Wellfleet where Grandma Evelyn took me every summer, where we'd sit on the porch and watch the tide go out. She told me once it was her favourite place in the world. She left it to me. Walter Sheffield looked at me over his glasses. Your grandmother knew exactly what would happen after she was gone. She spent the last 8 years making sure you'd be protected. The question is, when do you want to use this? Thanksgiving, I said. He's invited the whole family. He studied me for a long moment, then gave a single slow nod. Thanksgiving morning, the house filled like a theatre. Cars lined Maple Avenue by 10 a.m. aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, the whole Whitmore apparatus. By noon, 32 people filled the Colonial and the noise was a living thing. I helped in the kitchen, because nobody asked me to do anything else. My mother and Alison sat at the breakfast nook drinking tea while I chopped vegetables. The family division of labour hadn't changed since I was 12. At 4 o'clock we sat down to eat. The dining room table sat 18. The overflow went to a folding table in the living room. I was placed at the folding table between my 10-year-old cousin and an empty chair. My father stood at the head of the main table, crystal chandelier above him, linen tablecloth white as a wedding dress. This Thanksgiving is special, he said, his courtroom voice. We've lost Mother this year, but the Whitmore family endures, and I'm proudest of all of my son Lucas, who just made partner at his firm. He turned to Lucas, to you, son. Applause. Lucas accepted it with practiced modesty, a slight nod, a hand on Alison's shoulder. From the folding table my Aunt Patricia called out, "What about Claire? Any news, sweetheart?" I opened my mouth. My father cut in without looking at me. Claire is still finding her way. She's creative, we'll give her that. A ripple of polite laughter. But every family needs someone to remind the rest of us not to take a wrong turn. Right, Claire? The laughter rolled across both tables, and I sat there absorbing it the way I had since childhood. Spine straight, face neutral, hands in my lap. My 10-year-old cousin looked up and whispered, "Are you okay?" I nodded and handed him a roll. After the plates were cleared and the pies were half gone and the port was flowing, my father stood again. "One more thing," he said. "Tomorrow morning I'll be making an important family announcement regarding Mother's estate. I expect everyone to be present." He smiled, the smile of a man who has already decided the outcome. I looked at Lucas. He was studying his wine glass with a small private smile. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the tablecloth. I looked at my father. He was looking right at me. Tomorrow, he was going to read his version of the will in front of everyone. I excused myself to do the dishes. The kitchen was quiet except for running water. I stood at the sink, scrubbing a roasting pan, suds up to my elbows. In the next room, 32 people were laughing, and not one of them had offered to help clear a single plate. Footsteps behind me. Lucas leaned against the doorframe, wine glass dangling from his fingers. "You know," he said casually, "you should really thank Dad for even letting you sit at the table. Even if it was the kids' table." He chuckled at his own joke. I didn't turn around. "Lucas," I said quietly, "do you know what Grandma left me?" The silence behind me changed. I heard his wine glass clink against the counter. When I glanced over my shoulder, his face had gone very still. He left the kitchen without a word. 10 minutes later, my father's voice thundered from the living room. "Claire, get in here, now." I dried my hands and walked in. 32 faces stared at me. The chandelier threw little rainbows across the ceiling. My father stood in the center of the room, port in one hand, the other hand pointing at me like a verdict. "What did you say to your brother?" His voice was the judicial baritone. "You threatened him with the will. You think you can manipulate this family." I opened my mouth. He didn't let me. "You're grounded," he said. "You are grounded until you apologize to your brother. Go to your room." The room erupted, not in protest, in laughter. 32 people, most of them adults, laughing because Charles Whitmore had just grounded his 29-year-old daughter like a misbehaving child. My face burned. The heat climbed from my chest to my temples in a single wave. I looked for my mother. Diane was sitting in the corner chair, staring at her hands, silent. Nobody said stop. Nobody said that's enough, Charles. Nobody said anything at all except laughter. I looked at my father. His watch caught the light as he jabbed his finger toward the staircase. "Go," he repeated, "now." I held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then I said, in a voice so calm it surprised even me, "All right." I turned, I walked upstairs. I closed the bedroom door behind me. And then I picked up my phone and called Walter Sheffield. It rang twice. He answered. "Mr. Sheffield," I said, "I need you to bring the originals tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. A pause, then his steady voice, "I'll be there." I hung up, set my alarm for 4 a.m., and sat on the edge of the twin bed in the dark, listening to the laughter still floating up through the floorboards. Laugh, I thought, enjoy it, because that is the last time. I left at 4:15 in the morning. No drama, no slamming doors. I packed my bag in the dark, slid the manila folder into my tote, and walked downstairs in my socks so the floorboards wouldn't creak. The only thing I left behind was the framed photo of Grandma Evelyn on the nightstand, face down. I drove to a 24-hour diner 3 miles from the house, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and waited for daylight. At 7:42 a.m. my phone lit up, a text from Lucas. "Where are you? Dad's looking for you." I didn't respond. Inside the Whitmore house, the morning unfolded like this. My father came downstairs at 7:30, freshly showered, pressed shirt, looking like a man about to chair a board meeting. He poured his coffee, scanned the room and said, "Someone go wake Claire. She's got an apology to make." Nobody moved, not because they were standing up for me, because nobody wanted to deal with it. Charles climbed the stairs himself, knocked twice, crisp and expectant. "Claire, it's morning. You ready to apologize to your brother?" Silence. He opened the door. The bed was made. The closet was open and empty. The drawers were cleared. The room held nothing of me except the photograph of Grandma Evelyn face down on the nightstand like a final punctuation mark. My cousin Jenny told me later that my father stood in that doorway for a full 10 seconds before his expression shifted. Confusion first, then something darker. He came downstairs slowly. "Claire's gone," he announced to the 20-odd relatives still lingering over breakfast. His voice was flat, controlled. "She left in the middle of the night like a coward." Lucas looked up from his laptop and smiled. "Well," he said, "that settles it." My father nodded. "It certainly does." He was about to speak again, something about making the estate announcement at 10, now that the only person who might object had run away, when the doorbell rang. My mother opened it. And there on the front porch, in a grey suit with a brown leather briefcase and an expression like a storm front, stood Walter Sheffield. "I'm Walter Sheffield," he said. "Attorney for Evelyn Whitmore. I need to speak with the entire family, right now." The dining room went quiet in stages. First the conversation nearest the front door, then a ripple of silence spreading table by table until even the children stopped fidgeting. Walter Sheffield walked into the room the way a man walks into a courtroom, unhurried, deliberate, completely certain of his authority. He set his briefcase on the dining table, right on top of the leftover Thanksgiving linen, and unclasped it without sitting down. His hands, I was told later, had a visible tremor, not from nerves, from anger. My father rose from his chair at the head of the table. Taller than Sheffield by 4 inches, broader by 30 pounds. He used every bit of it. "Walter," the name came out like a warning. "You were not invited, this is my home." Sheffield looked at him. "This is the home that Evelyn Whitmore built with her family's money, Mr. Whitmore, and I'm here because I have a legal obligation, a fiduciary duty to the beneficiary of her trust. Claire has no rights to. Claire is the sole named beneficiary of an irrevocable trust executed 8 years ago. You know this, you've known it since the day your mother signed it." The room was so still, I could have heard the furnace click on 3 rooms away. 30 pairs of eyes moved between the two men like spectators at a trial. Charles's jaw clenched. My mother was in cognitive decline, whatever she signed. Was signed in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and accompanied by a physician's evaluation confirming full mental competency. Sheffield opened the briefcase and removed a folder. "I have the documentation here. Would you like me to read it aloud, Mr. Whitmore, to everyone?" The question hung in the air. My Aunt Patricia leaned forward. My Uncle Mark put down his coffee cup. Even the children had gone silent. Charles Whitmore looked at the folder in Sheffield's, hands the way a man looks at a loaded weapon pointed at his chest. Then he straightened his shoulders and said very quietly, "Get out of my house." "Mr. Whitmore," Sheffield said. "What have you done?" What happened next was the moment the mask finally cracked, not slowly, not gracefully, in a sudden ugly split right down the center. My father stepped toward Sheffield. "I said get out, you're trespassing, I'll call the police." "You're welcome to," Sheffield replied, not moving an inch. "And when they arrive, I'll show them the petition you filed with the court 3 weeks ago, the one where you claimed you were unable to locate the beneficiary of your mother's trust." He paused. "The beneficiary whose phone number you have, whose address you have, who was sleeping in this house last night." Charles's face went through a sequence, red, then white, then a kind of mottled grey. Around the room I could see the reaction spreading, Patricia pressing her hand to her mouth, Uncle Mark's brow furrowing, cousins exchanging glances. That's when Lucas stood up. My brother, the golden child, the lawyer, stepped forward with his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Mr. Sheffield," he said smoothly, "I appreciate your concern, but any documents you're referencing can be contested in the appropriate legal." "You drafted the petition, didn't you, Mr. Whitmore?" Sheffield turned to face him. His voice was quiet, precise, surgical. "You prepared a filing to change the beneficiary of an irrevocable trust on behalf of your father, who is also the trustee. I have the emails." Lucas's composure didn't shatter, it evaporated. One moment he was a confident attorney. The next, a man whose mouth had gone slack and whose eyes had darted involuntarily to his father. "Dad," he said under his breath, "we need to talk privately." Charles didn't even look at him. "No, I have nothing to hide." Patricia stood up from her chair. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the particular authority of a woman who had watched a family lie to itself for decades and had finally had enough. "Charles," she said, "let the man speak." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Not loud, not defiant, but present, like the first cracks in a frozen lake. My father looked around the room and saw, perhaps for the first time, that the audience he'd assembled for his own performance was no longer on his side. "This is absurd," he said, but his voice had lost its courtroom resonance. It sounded smaller, thinner. Charles did what Charles has always done. When he feels the ground shifting beneath him, he escalates. Everyone listened to me. He raised both hands, palms out. "This man," he jabbed a finger at Sheffield, "was hired by my mother years ago when she was already in decline. He's been filling Claire's head with fantasies. This is a family matter, and I will not have an outsider." "I served your mother for 20 years, Sheffield's voice cut through like a blade. "I am not an outsider, and I am here because you violated the terms of a legal instrument that you swore as trustee to uphold." "Out," my father's voice cracked on the word. He pointed at the door. "Get out of this house right now, or I swear to God I will have you arrested for trespassing." Sheffield looked at him for a long moment. Then he closed his briefcase with a deliberate click, tucked it under his arm and nodded. Not in defeat, in acknowledgement, like a chess player recognizing the next 3 moves. "I'll leave," he said calmly, "but I'll be back at 2 o'clock this afternoon for the formal reading of Evelyn Whitmore's estate. It's on your own calendar." He paused at the doorway. "And I won't be coming alone." The front door closed behind him with a soft click. My father turned back to the room. 30 faces, some confused, some uncomfortable. A few Patricia, Jenny, openly skeptical. He smoothed his shirt, adjusted his watch, reassembled his composure. "I'm sorry you all had to see that," he said. "Claire hired some bargain basement lawyer to stir up trouble. It's what she does. She runs from responsibility and then causes chaos from a distance." He shook his head with practiced sadness. "This afternoon I'll read Mom's will properly and everything will be clear. I promise you that." Lucas, who had been standing frozen by the sofa, sat back down and pulled his laptop onto his knees. His fingers moved quickly, deleting something. The room exhaled. People returned to their coffee, their conversations. The crisis had been deferred. Charles Whitmore was still in control. Or so he believed. 2 o'clock was 5 hours away. At 1:45 I drove down Maple Avenue. The rain had stopped. A thin November sun was pushing through the clouds, turning the wet street into a mirror. The oak trees along the block were almost bare now, their branches sketched black against the pale sky. I drove slowly. This was the street where Grandma Evelyn taught me to ride a bike, the sidewalk where she walked me to school, the front yard where she'd knelt beside me in the dirt and shown me how to transplant a seedling. "The secret asterisk," she'd said, pressing my small hand into the soil, "is to take the whole root ball. You don't leave any part of yourself behind." I parked on the block behind the house, next to Sheffield's silver sedan. He was sitting in the driver's seat, briefcase on his lap, reading glasses on. He glanced at me through the windshield and gave a single nod. I got out of the car, camel coat, canvas tote with the manila folder inside. My hands were steady. The gate was open. The front door was unlocked. From inside I could hear voices. The murmur of 30 people assembled and waiting for Charles Whitmore to tell them how the world worked. I walked up the porch steps my grandmother had built and pushed the door open. I slipped in through the kitchen and stood in the hallway just out of sight of the living room. Through the archway I could see the scene my father had staged, the living room rearranged, chairs pulled from everywhere, all facing the fireplace, 30 people seated and attentive. Charles stood before them in his pressed shirt, reading glasses on his nose. In his hand, a single sheet of paper. He held it the way judges hold verdicts, high enough that everyone could see it, low enough that no one could read it. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "As you know, my mother's passing left certain matters to be settled. I've reviewed her wishes carefully with input from Lucas, and I want to share the distribution plan she intended." He paused for effect. The room was silent. "The family trust will be consolidated under my management. The educational fund, $580,000, will be transferred to Lucas for stewardship of the next generation." He glanced up, checking his audience. As for Claire, a small, merciful smile. Mother wanted her to have a gesture of goodwill. $5,000. A few sympathetic nods. Allison placed her hand on Lucas's arm. Lucas lowered his eyes in a performance of humility. Are there any questions? My father asked. From the hallway, I took a breath, pulled the manila folder from my tote and stepped into the room. Behind me, the front door opened quietly. Walter Sheffield walked in. Every head turned, 32 faces, some surprised, some confused, a few genuinely pleased to see me. My cousin Jenny, sitting in the back row, gave me a small nod. Aunt Patricia straightened in her chair. My father's expression went through 3 phases in 2 seconds. Surprise, annoyance, then a hardening, the courtroom mask snapping back into place. Well, he said, the prodigal daughter returns. A few obligatory chuckles. I assumed you run off for good this time. Are you here to apologize to your brother? No, I said. My voice was level. Calm in a way that surprised me because my heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure people could see it through my coat. I'm here to hear the will, the real one. I walked past him, past his pointed finger, past his watch, past the chair where he'd held court for 30 years, and I set the manila folder on the table beside the fireplace. Sheffield stepped in behind me, briefcase, grey suit, the quiet authority of a man who had been doing this for decades. What is this? My father said, the annoyance curdling into something uglier. I told you this morning, get out of my house. I turned to face the room, not my father, the room, the people. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said, but what my father just read is not my grandmother's will. It's not her trust document, it's a distribution plan he wrote himself. I placed my hand on the folder. This is the original irrevocable trust that Evelyn Whitmore executed 8 years ago. It was filed with her attorney, Mr. Sheffield, and verified by Webster Bank, the institution managing the trust fund. I opened the folder. My grandmother named one beneficiary, me. Silence, not the polite silence of a family gathering. The absolute atmospheric silence of a room full of people who have just realized they are witnessing something they cannot undo. My father's face drained of color, all at once like someone had pulled a plug. Patricia said clearly and firmly, let her speak. Sheffield stepped forward. He opened his briefcase on the table beside my folder, removed the original trust document, and held it up so the room could see the notary's red seal. The state of Connecticut, bright against the cream-colored paper. This is the irrevocable trust of Evelyn Margaret Whitmore, he said. His voice carried the way good lawyers' voices carry, without shouting, without strain. Executed on March 14th, 8 years ago, I was present at the signing along with 2 independent witnesses. Both are available to confirm. He began to read. The settlor, Evelyn M. Whitmore, hereby establishes this irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of her granddaughter, Clea Evelyn Whitmore. He paused and looked at the room over his glasses. Trust corpus, a sum of $580,000 held and managed by Webster Bank, Hartford, Connecticut. Additionally, the real property located at 214 Maple Avenue, Hartford, Connecticut, deed recorded under Hartford County, originally purchased in 1981, shall transfer to the beneficiary upon the settlor's death. A gasp swept through the room, audible, collective. Uncle Mark leaned forward so far his chair creaked. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and looked directly at my father. The house, someone whispered from the back row. She left her the house. As trustee, Sheffield continued, Charles A. Whitmore was given administrative authority only. He was expressly prohibited from altering the beneficiary designation, dispersing funds without the beneficiary's written consent, or encumbering the real property in any way. Sheffield lowered the document and looked at my father. In the past 3 months, Mr. Whitmore has filed a petition to change the beneficiary to his son, Lucas, claiming he was unable to locate Miss Whitmore. He also failed to notify her of the trust's existence after Evelyn's death, as required by Connecticut law. Sheffield reached into the briefcase and produced the printed email chain. He held it up, the yellow highlighting visible from across the room. These are emails between Charles Whitmore and Lucas Whitmore, in which Lucas drafted the fraudulent petition and Charles approved it. He read aloud the line that had burned itself into my memory. She won't fight it, she never fights anything. That's the beauty of it, Dad. The room turned to look at Lucas. My brother was sitting very still, his hand frozen on Allison's arm. His face had gone the color of ash. Allison slowly, carefully, extracted her arm from under his hand and folded both of hers in her lap. Aunt Patricia shook her head. Uncle Mark muttered something under his breath. Jenny stood up from her chair in the back row and walked forward to stand beside me, not saying anything, just standing there. Present. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. She was confused, he said, but the words came out threadbare, worn through from overuse. My mother didn't know what she was signing. Sheffield's response was immediate and surgical. Your mother's physician conducted a cognitive evaluation the same week as the signing. The results are documented and included in this file. He placed the medical report on the table. Evelyn Whitmore scored in the 93rd percentile for her age group. She was sharper than most of the people in this room. A long beat of silence. Then from the back, Great-Aunt Ruth, 83 years old, Evelyn's younger sister, spoke. Evelyn told me about the trust, she said quietly. 8 years ago, she said Charles will try to take it, but I've made sure he can't. She knew, she always knew. My father looked at Ruth, then at Patricia, then at the room full of faces that were no longer looking at him with respect or deference or even polite neutrality. They were looking at him the way you look at something you've just discovered was rotten underneath. He had assembled his own audience, and they had just become his jury. Charles turned on Lucas. The alliance, the one they'd built over 33 years of shared entitlement, collapsed in a single sentence. Say something, Charles's voice broke open, raw, jagged. You're the lawyer, contest it, do something. Lucas didn't move. He sat on the sofa, laptop still on his knees, and spoke in a voice so low that only the front row could hear him clearly. Dad, irrevocable means irrevocable. You can't contest it. I told you that from the beginning. You told me you'd handle it. My father's hand came down on the back of a dining chair with a crack that made the nearest cousins flinch. His knuckles went white around the wood. You said she'd never find out. And there it was. In front of 30 witnesses, my father confirmed every detail Walter Sheffield had just presented. Lucas had told him it was risky. Charles had pushed forward anyway, and both of them had agreed in writing that I was too passive to fight back. The port glass that Charles had been holding slipped from his other hand and shattered on the hardwood. The dark red pooled on the floor and spread slowly toward the Persian rug. Nobody moved to clean it up. Then something shifted. My father's posture changed. The aggression drained away, and in its place came something I had seen him use 1,000 times before. On my mother, on me, on anyone who cornered him. He softened his voice, lowered his shoulders, turned to me with glistening eyes. Claire, sweetheart. The word landed like a counterfeit bill on a counter. I was only trying to protect the family's assets. You're young, you don't have experience with this kind of money. I was doing this because I love you. I looked at him, the man who had called my career a joke, who had seated me at the children's table, who had grounded me at 29 in front of every relative I had, who had told a court that he couldn't find me when I was sleeping in his own house. I let the silence hold for 3 seconds. Then I said, you didn't do this because you love me, Dad. You did this because you've never believed a daughter deserves the same as a son. And that's not love, that's control. My mother stood up. I hadn't noticed her crying, but her face was wet and her hands were trembling. She looked at my father, the man she'd been silent beside for 35 years, and said in a voice that shook but did not break. You owe her an apology, Charles. You've owed her one her entire life. The room held its breath. My father looked at my mother as though she had spoken in a language he didn't recognize. Then he looked at me, then at the 30 faces watching him. He said nothing. He turned and walked into his study and closed the door. In the minutes that followed, the room rearranged itself. Not the furniture, the people, the invisible lines of allegiance that had structured every Whitmore gathering for as long as I could remember shifted quietly and permanently, like tectonic plates. Aunt Patricia reached me first. She pulled me into a hug that smelled like Estee Lauder and coffee, and she said close to my ear, "Your grandmother would be so proud of you right now, sweetheart, so proud." Jenny squeezed my shoulder. I always knew you were the toughest one in this family, you just never needed to prove it before. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years came forward, a handshake, a nod, a quiet, "I'm sorry, Claire." Not all of them, some stayed seated, uncomfortable, staring at the floor. A few stood up and left, not in protest, in the way people leave a room where something has broken that they don't know how to fix. Lucas rose from the sofa. He didn't look at me. He took Allison's arm and walked toward the front door. Alison paused in the hallway, reached up and unclasped her diamond studs, dropped them into her coat pocket, as though she wanted to make herself smaller, less visible, less associated. Sheffield was already organizing the documents back into his briefcase. "I'll file the petition to remove Mr. Whitmore as trustee first thing Monday morning," he said to me. "The court process takes approximately 30 days. In the meantime, the trust is frozen. No disbursements, no changes." I nodded. The living room was emptying slowly. The Thanksgiving linen on the table was creased and stained with port. The Waterford clock on the mantelpiece read 2:47. The whole thing had taken 47 minutes. 30 years of silence answered in 47 minutes. Monday morning, Walter Sheffield filed 3 documents with the Hertford County Circuit Court. The first was a petition to remove Charles A. Whitmore as trustee of the Evelyn M. Whitmore Irrevocable Trust, citing breach of fiduciary duty. The second was a formal request to appoint Sheffield as interim trustee until I could designate a permanent replacement. The third was a complaint filed with the Connecticut State Bar against Lucas R. Whitmore, alleging violation of the rules of professional conduct. Within 2 weeks, the court granted the trustee removal. Charles didn't contest it. His own attorney advised him bluntly that he had no legal footing. "Irrevocable means irrevocable, Judge Whitmore," he reportedly said. "And the email evidence is damning. If you fight this, you'll lose, and it'll cost you $60,000 to find that out." The $580,000 educational trust was transferred to an account in my name at Webster Bank. The deed to 214 Maple Avenue was updated. My name replaced Evelyn's as owner, the colonial house, the wrought iron gate, the oak dining table, the garden where my grandmother grew peonies. Mine. And Lucas received a formal notice of investigation from the Connecticut State Bar. The process would take months, but the outcome was already taking shape. A 6-month suspension of his license. His largest client dropped him within days. He quietly transitioned to corporate consulting. My father called me once, 3 days after the filing. I answered because I thought even then that maybe he would say the words. He didn't. He said, "You've destroyed this family." I said, "No, Dad, you did, I just brought the receipts." He hung up. I haven't heard from him since. 2 weeks after the court order, I drove to Maple Avenue with a single key on a plain brass ring that Sheffield had handed me across his desk. "It's yours," he'd said simply. And for some reason, those 2 words undid me more than anything else had. I parked on the street. The oak trees were completely bare now, their branches a lattice against the December sky. The wrought iron gate swung open with a creak I'd heard 10,000 times. The porch steps, Grandma Evelyn had them replaced in 2009, cedar over the old pine still had her welcome mat, faded green, a pattern of ferns. I turned the key. The door opened into the foyer and the smell hit me first. Wood polish, old books, a trace of the lavender sachets my grandmother kept in every closet. The house was silent in a way I'd never experienced. My father's presence had always been the dominant frequency here, his voice filling every room, his opinions occupying every conversation. Without him, the house breathed differently. It breathed like it was finally resting. I walked through each room slowly. The living room where 30 people had sat and watched my life change. The dining room with the oak table still bearing faint water rings from port glasses. The kitchen where I'd scrubbed a roasting pan alone while my family laughed. Upstairs, my bedroom, the poster, the twin bed, the nightstand with the empty drawer. Grandma Evelyn's master bedroom, her reading chair by the window, a stack of novels on the side table. Then the gardens. I stood at the back door and looked out at what had been Evelyn Whitmore's pride. The peony beds, now brown and tangled, edged with overgrown boxwood. The stone path she'd laid herself was barely visible under dead leaves. The bird bath was dry. I knelt, pressed my palms flat against the cold earth, closed my eyes. "I'll fix it, Grandma," I said. "I'll bring it back." And I knew, with the certainty that only grief and love and good dirt under your fingernails can give you, that I would. A week later, on a Saturday morning cold enough to see my breath, I drove 90 minutes south to Cape Cod. I hadn't been there in 6 years. The last time was the summer before Grandma Evelyn's health started to decline. The 2 of us sitting on the porch of the Cedar Cottage in Wellfleet, drinking chamomile tea, watching the tide pull back and leave the sand gleaming. She said, "This is my favorite place on earth, Claire. When I'm gone, I want someone who loves it to keep it." I'd thought she was being sentimental, she was being precise. The cottage was smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was bigger. Weathered cedar shingles, a porch that wrapped around two sides, salt air so thick you could taste it. The key, another brass one also from Sheffield, turned smoothly and the door opened onto a space that still smelled like her. Lavender, old paperbacks, the faintly sweet scent of cedar walls in winter. On the kitchen table there was a wooden box, not hidden, placed there deliberately, as though she'd known exactly who would come through the door and when. I lifted the lid. Inside, a stack of photographs. Grandma Evelyn and me, ages 5 through 22, in this very cottage, planting beach grass in the dunes, building a driftwood fort, standing in matching rain boots on a stormy July afternoon, both of us grinning like idiots. Under the photographs a letter, short this time, just a few lines. Claire, if you're reading this, you were brave enough, I knew you would be. This house is yours, it always was. I was just keeping it warm for you. Start over here if you need to, or come when the world is too much. Either way, it's waiting. I am so proud of you. Always, Grandma. I sat on the porch, her porch, my porch, and cried. Not the way I'd cried in the twin bed at Maple Avenue, stifled and ashamed. This was different. This was the kind of crying that opens something instead of closing it. The kind that leaves you lighter, not emptier. The ocean was grey and vast, and completely indifferent to everything that had happened in that living room. The tide didn't care about Charles Whitmore's courtroom voice. The waves didn't know what an irrevocable trust was. I wiped my face, took a breath of salt air, and for the first time in months felt something I'd almost forgotten the shape of. Peace. That Sunday night back in Hartford, I sat at the oak dining table in the Maple Avenue house, my house, and wrote an email to my family. I wrote it once, read it twice. Sent it without a third draft because I knew if I kept revising, I'd start softening things that needed to stay sharp. To Charles Whitmore, Diane Whitmore, Lucas Whitmore. I don't want to cut anyone out of my life. That was never the point. But I will not return to a relationship where I am belittled, dismissed, or treated as less than. If you want to have a relationship with me, it will be on terms of mutual respect. Not hierarchy. The door is open, but it swings both ways now. Cleo asterisk. My mother called 20 minutes later. She was crying, the real kind, not the anxious kind. I'm so sorry, Claire, she said. I should have stood up for you years ago. I was afraid of him. That's not an excuse, it's just the truth. I know, Mom, I said. I don't blame you, but I need you to start choosing what's right, not what's easy. Can you do that? A long pause, then I'm going to try. Lucas replied by text the next morning, 2 words. I understand. I read it, set the phone down, didn't reply. Understanding was a start, but it wasn't the same as accountability. He'd get there or he wouldn't. That was his work, not mine. My father didn't respond. Not that day, not the next week, not the week after that. The silence was its own kind of answer. Familiar, really. Charles Whitmore had been silent on the things that mattered my entire life. At least now I'd stopped waiting for him to speak. 6 months later, spring had come to Hartford, and the peonies were coming back. I'd spent the winter on my hands and knees in my grandmother's garden, pruning, clearing, aerating the soil that had gone sour from 2 years of neglect. The roots were deeper than I'd expected. They had survived the abandonment. They just needed someone to cut away the dead weight and let the light in. I knew the feeling. With the student loan gone, paid in full $41,300, the most satisfying check I've ever written, I used a portion of the trust to lease a small studio space in the West End. Whitmore Landscape Design, my name on the door, my grandmother's name really. The Whitmore name meant something different to me now. The Maple Avenue house had become both home and office. I converted the downstairs study, my father's old throne room, the one with the mahogany bookshelves and the leather chair, into a design studio. I replaced his legal volumes with plant identification guides, stacked the shelves with soil samples and seed catalogues. It felt right. It felt like rewriting. Jenny came by on weekends to help with the garden. Aunt Patricia called every Sunday morning, sharp at 9. Just checking in, she'd say, and then we'd talk for an hour. My mother came to visit for the first time on a Thursday afternoon in April. The first time she'd entered the house without Charles beside her. We didn't say much. We planted tulip bulbs along the front walk, side by side, and that was enough. Charles rented an apartment across town. I heard through Patricia that he told his friends I'd stolen the house, that my grandmother had been manipulated, that the whole thing was Sheffield's fault. The story changed depending on the audience, but it always had the same ending. Charles Whitmore was the victim. Some things, I suppose, are truly irrevocable. Lucas's suspension from the Connecticut State Bar lasted 6 months. He'd moved to corporate consulting. Something with logistics, Patricia said. He and Allison had quietly separated. I didn't know the details and didn't ask. He hadn't contacted me since the I understand text. I left the door open the way I said I would. I just wasn't going to stand in the doorway waiting. I'm telling you this story from the porch of the Cape Cod cottage. It's a Saturday. The tide is out. The ocean is doing what it always does, standing there, solid and ancient and unbothered by anything as temporary as a family argument. I come here on weekends when I need to remember what quiet sounds like. The cottage is exactly as Grandma Evelyn left it, except I've added a small herb garden by the front steps. Rosemary, thyme, lavender. The kind of plants that get stronger the more wind they take. I'm not telling this story to teach anyone a lesson. I don't believe in that. Every family is its own country with its own laws and its own wars, and the people inside it are the only ones who know the real map. I can't tell you what to do with your father, your mother, your brother, your inheritance. I can only tell you what I did. Here's what I know now. Silence isn't agreement. I spent 29 years being quiet at the dinner table, and the people around me took that silence and called it consent. It was just a woman who hadn't found her evidence yet. Waiting isn't weakness. My father and my brother counted on the idea that I wouldn't fight. They were almost right. What they didn't account for was that there's a difference between someone who can't fight and someone who's choosing when to. And the last thing, the thing that matters most, my grandmother didn't leave me money, she left me proof. Proof that someone in my family saw me, the real me, the one who builds things, and decided I was worth protecting. Not with words, with documents, with plans, with the kind of love that hires a lawyer and thinks 8 years ahead. That's the inheritance that changed my life. Not the $580,000, not the houses, the knowledge that I was worth the trouble. I still have the Brooklyn Bridge poster. It's on the wall of my studio now, behind my drafting table, edges still curling. I look at it every morning and think about the girl who taped it up at 16, who wanted to build beautiful things and was told that wasn't enough. She was enough, she was always enough, she just needed the paperwork to prove it. Early morning, the Maple Avenue garden. The soil is damp from last night's rain. The air smells the way Connecticut air smells in spring. Green and clean and full of the particular promise that comes from things deciding to grow. I'm on my knees in the dirt planting peonies, the same variety my grandmother grew. Sarah Bernhardt, she always said, because she was dramatic. She was pink, and she lasted longer than anyone expected. The roots go in, the soil goes over. I press it down gently, firmly, the way she taught me. The whole root ball, nothing left behind. The sun clears the roofline and falls across the garden in long golden bars. Somewhere in the house, my coffee is getting cold. Somewhere in Hartford, my father is waking up in a rented apartment and telling himself a story where he's the hero. Somewhere in the future, maybe he'll stop. I stand up, wipe the dirt from my hands, and notice something on the front porch that wasn't there last night. An envelope, no stamp, no return address, just my name in handwriting I'd know anywhere. Not Grandma Evelyn's this time, but almost as familiar. I open it, a single line. I'm sorry I never stood up, I'm standing now. Mom asterisk. I fold the letter, tuck it into my coat pocket right next to the one from Grandma Evelyn, the one I carry everywhere, the cream-coloured stationery with the blue ink and the words that saved my life. 2 letters, 2 women, one who planned ahead and one who finally caught up. I walk back into my house, the house my grandmother built, the house my father lost, the house that was always meant for someone who would take care of it. I close the door. And for the first time in 29 years, it feels like coming home. Thank you for staying until the end, I mean that. If this story made you feel something, anger, relief, recognition, hope, then it did exactly what I needed it to do. Hit like if it resonated. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know who's out there. I'm Clea Whitmore, and that was the last time I ever sat at the kids' table.